So we now welcome Senate President Martin Looney and State Representative Pat Dillon.
Thank you, Judy, and it is a great honor to be here this evening with my colleague, Representative Dillon. One of the things I would first like to mention is that having attended the brief ceremony at the Holocaust Memorial a little while before becoming here, that is a great reminder of when a city comes together with civic pride to recognize a tragedy, a world tragedy, and to recognize with the force of a municipality itself and an act of civic statement and witness that such a thing, a tragedy like that, must be memorialized. And unfortunately, in every generation, we need to be reminded again that violence and hate based on bigotry and bias continues to rear its ugly head. At that time, I was a staff member working for Mayor Logue when then Alderman Ed Zielinski and his wife Doris approached the mayor early in his first term in 1976 that it would be a great statement for the city of New Haven as a place of civic virtue to be the first place in the first municipality to have on public ground a Holocaust memorial. And everyone in City Hall was excited about that, including, and someone who did a great deal to help make it happen, the then Chief of Staff, Rosa DeLauro, at that time. He was really fantastic. I had the honor to be one of Rosa's assistants at the time, working for Mayor Logue. But as I said, this renewal, this memory has to keep being renewed in every single generation because the problem continues to be just below the surface and then flares up at time to time when some public officials seem to encourage it and empower it and sanction it by the sort of dog whistle comments that they make. One of the things that we're aware of at the state level is the need for our own involvement. Several years ago, after the Sandy Hook tragedy, we were able to appropriate bonding funds for physical security and security hardening at both public and private schools after that terrible incident in 2012. Now there is a movement growing at the state level to provide capital funds for assistance to synagogues and other places of religious worship that might also be targets, as they have been already in many cases for this. We're also looking at perhaps providing additional resources to the Department of Public Safety to have a specially designated hate crimes unit with more resources to investigate this kind of scandal and blight in our society whenever it occurs. So it is so encouraging to see people gathered here this evening. Unfortunately, the memory must constantly be renewed. As was said earlier, we know that there are not only are there Holocaust deniers denying an event that ended 75 years ago, there are people who even deny that Sandy Hook happened. That happened 7 years ago, as incredible as that might be. So again, memory must continue, and the only force that we have as a witness against this repetition of the worst aspects of our history is that memory constantly be renewed by ceremony and by investment in every generation. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the Mayor's Office and to the Federation for sponsoring this. If there's one thing we've learned, sadly, it's that democracy is not self-enforcing. And it's also, sadly, that all of the progress we have made against hate is not guaranteed. When I was a kid, I would have told you growing up in Queens. I was not born in New Haven, so they took me in. The Holocaust was something that happened to my great-grandparents and my grandparents' generation and in another country, and that some people came here for safety, and that there were people that we knew in the neighborhood who didn't want to talk about it, but everybody knew. And that it was a sad thing that happened that was scary, that was a long time ago. I didn't know then that our own immigration laws kept people from coming in here, and that they had only been passed in 1924. There were a lot of things I didn't know. After Charlottesville, I went to Germany with my husband now, who works with a group called Fellowships at Auschwitz. And the people that we met with in Berlin, who used to think Angela Merkel was too right-wing, were the generation of people who worked to save all of those those monuments. They put the Stolpensteins in. They worked to protect the track 17. They went through an extraordinary amount of effort to make sure that the built environment would make sure that people would remember. They didn't just say remember, they'll never forget. They made sure that there was a memory. And one of the people who had been very active, who really has a position where he has to be very careful, was horrified, and when we arrived in the meeting said, you know, there's been an election. And I said, what's going on? And he took a piece of paper and put it in front of me and wrote AFD on it, which is Alternatives for Deutschland, which is the right-wing party, which had just gained power in that election in Germany. And so we learned on that trip, and for all that I thought I knew, I was so ignorant, just what happened in the 1930s. We went to the place where the useless eaters, the people who had disabilities, were executed outside of Berlin. And when the Catholic bishop objected, they closed it down and they moved it to Poland. So that there was nothing, no one else was objecting. It was happening off stage. All of that we learned. I am so grateful and so worried that we have not left, my generation has not left for the next generation a decent legacy. And I am so grateful to have been able to co-sponsor the legislation that Senator Looney and others had spearheaded on education, and people here, Betty Levy, who contacted me about it. But we need to think of ways to actively do this, and it's really hard because you have to be mindful all the time. It could be you're sitting in a room with teenagers and you say, that's not funny. It could be that simple, and it has to happen from everyone. I'm so pleased and so thrilled that you have done this tonight, because we need to keep doing things to make sure that never forget is not just a slogan. It has to be active. Thank you.